Good afternoon, everybody from Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. I'm Chris White with the American Battlefield Trust, and I'm joined by my co-host today, Chris Mikowski, and we are here for the 160th anniversary of the Gettysburg Address, which took place 160 years ago tomorrow, and we're here covering the annual Remembrance Day Parade, the 67th annual Remembrance Day Parade here in Gettysburg. And before we start off down the road here with our coverage of the parade, which will be starting at 1 o'clock, I just want to give a shout out to the Farnsworth House. The Farnsworth House has been our home for the last 7 years here, and you can see the beer garden down there off to our left and all the people here. It's a great place to stay. It's a great place to eat, drink, and be merry here in Gettysburg. In 1863, it was the home of Harvey Sweeney, and you can see the visible marks of war here at the Farnsworth House right on the side of it, because it was the front line here along Gettysburg's Baltimore Street. We're looking north along Baltimore Street here in Gettysburg. Chris, this is your second or third Remembrance Day Parade, I think. So thanks for being here.
I'm excited to be here. It is a Chamber of Commerce day here in America's favorite small town. Blue skies, temperatures in the low 50s, which gives us a pretty close approximation to what the weather was like when Lincoln himself came here. One of the neat things that I really like about this particular perspective is right across the street, we can see one of what used to be a pair of live sycamore trees that were witness trees to Lincoln's procession down through town. They were here at the time of the battle. They now the one remaining tree that you can see right there in the middle of our screen is that witness tree. There's a plaque on the ground in front of it, so if you ever come by to visit, you can see that. And of course, it's right there next to Mr. G's Ice Cream, a favorite spot here along Baltimore Street, and so easy to find, easy to locate. Great atmosphere here. The streets are lined. It's going to be all the way from the top of the hill off to our left. The parade route will go in front of us here, then off to our right, and then down Von Steinwehr, all the way down toward where the old visitor center used to be. So the streets are lined all the way. It's kind of a great little tailgating atmosphere. As Chris said, lots of food, lots of drink, lots of good company. I would say the one thing that differentiates it from an actual tailgate is that we have a lot of people that are dressed up in Civil War era clothing, which is one of the reasons that makes this such kind of a fun event. Is you can see all sorts of different uniforms from north and south. You can see civilian garb. You can see, I've seen people dressed as journalists. I've seen people dressed as mourners. So it's a really neat hodgepodge of period clothing, which makes this a really great, fun family event. I know earlier when Chris and I were walking through town as part of our video tour earlier, we talked about, we had some people that were commenting about how, gosh, it's a bucket list idea for me to go there. I really want to show up and come to Remembrance Day weekend. And it is a great family event to do that with. So bring your kids. Nothing really gets young folks engaged like seeing people dressed up as soldiers, and they can talk about the equipment they have. And we're going to get into some of that as we have some of those folks in the parade today. So a beautiful day to be here, Chris. I'm excited. Thanks so much for being with us here at the American Battlefield Trust, watching us on Facebook, on YouTube. Share, tell your friends, tell your family, and take part in today's Remembrance Day activities. Chris, this we were calling it Remembrance Day, but this has a couple different names for different reasons.
Yeah, so this is Remembrance Day. It's put on by the Sons of Union veterans. You'll see a parade that includes Union and Confederate reenactors. You'll also see civilians, and it's kind of the end of the season parade for the reenacting community. It's that one last hurrah for everyone to get together, come here, and remember the dedication of the Soldiers National Cemetery here at Gettysburg. It was dedicated on November 19th, 1863. And it's also known as a consecration in the time of the Civil War. So there's all kinds of different names, but the Remembrance Day Parade will take place, as you pointed out, here down Baltimore Street. They're going to follow the historic route mostly, which will bring them up from town, which is to the north of us. If you're looking on our camera past that open flag, that's Baltimore Street. They'll come towards us. Then they're going to make a right, not go up Baltimore Street, where most people think they will, or over the Baltimore Pike. They're going to make a right down what was the Taneytown Road at the time. Today it's Von Steinwehr Avenue or Steinwehr Avenue. And then they'll make a left up the Taneytown Road if they were following the historic marching route. The parade itself will actually end in Gettysburg's National Military Park is how that works. So it's a really interesting parade to come to because you get to see a hodgepodge of uniforms. Some people here today have already said they're here on Facebook and on YouTube. They're watching from the sidewalks. They're experiencing it. Our friend John Eric is watching us right now, Chris. So give a big shout out to him.
Huzzah, huzzah. We'll have actually a special story from Ohio coming up in just a little bit. John Eric is in West Virginia, kind of close to that little cradle of Ohio and the Ohio River there. So we got a lot's coming up. We're going to offer live coverage as the parade comes through, talk a little bit about the history of the regiments and units that are represented here today and some of their histories. We'll talk a little bit about the history of the parade. We've got folks here that are dressed up in their GAR uniforms, which is pretty cool. Folks who maybe were interested in the reenacting community early on in their careers and maybe are a little past their prime for sleeping on the ground on campaign, so they have traded in their Army uniforms for their GAR uniforms. It's really neat to kind of see the way they're continuing on that story that the veterans themselves carried on as well.
And GAR means Grand Army of the Republic, and that's what the veterans would call themselves, the Grand Army of the Republic. And you would have the Sons of Union veterans, you have Sons of Confederate veterans, the United Daughters of Confederacy. You have a lot of folks here who are representing their ancestors, or at least honoring their ancestors from both sides. Some folks are just enthusiasts who love to come out, reenact for the camaraderie, the history. There's a lot of reasons that people do this, but it's interesting to come out here and see just the melting pot of reenactors and reenactor uniforms that you have here. Someone was asking, do they still serve game pie at the Farnsworth House? I can tell you that they do. It was on the menu because Chris and I ate there today. Did not have the game pie. And before the parade starts, we are here with special permission where we are. Our friend Mike is letting us here up on the porch. I want to give a shout out to Mike and the guys behind us. Western Pennsylvania is well represented on this porch. So as everyone probably knows from watching, I'm a Western Pennsylvania guy, and most of them are Pittsburghers, and Mike's from State College now. So thank you all for hosting us here on the Farnsworth porch here. Really having a good time. So Chris, you know, one of the reasons we're here not only to honor the soldiers from the battle or honor the dead here in Gettysburg's National Cemetery, it's to honor Abraham Lincoln and one of America's greatest speeches. 272 words, 10 sentences, the Gettysburg Address. It brings people here from all over the world. Visitors who don't even know anything about the battle know Lincoln's Gettysburg Address. So I think it's powerful that one speech in 3-ish minutes would bring so many people together here on this great battlefield.
And of course, there's that great irony that Lincoln says, "The world will little note nor long remember what we say here." But those words continue to echo down to us today. I always like to remind people that Lincoln was not only speaking to that audience at the cemetery dedication, but he continues to speak to us today. And I encourage folks to go back and read that speech, go back and listen to that speech, go back and listen to it read by several different people, because when you hear that speech read aloud, people bring different emphases to it, different interpretations, and I think that helps us find the different ways that speech continues to speak to us. And so, very powerful words to remind us that the work is unfinished and our work today remains unfinished. The call to citizenship that Lincoln puts out in that speech is something that is as important to us in our democracy today as it was back in 1863.
Yeah, I think it's important to remember that Lincoln is not the primary speaker here in Gettysburg. If you're here on November 19th, 1863, this town is filled with people. There's at least 15,000 people here in Gettysburg, and they are in the streets, in the buildings, everywhere they can, because they're here for the consecration of the Gettysburg National Cemetery. But many of them are not here to hear Abraham Lincoln. In fact, many are here to listen to the greatest orator of his day, and that is Edward Everett. He's a former politician, a former vice presidential candidate. He is an orator renowned for going around the nation and raising money for Mount Vernon to help with the preservation of George Washington's home there, the famous home high above the Potomac River. And I think that the 2-hour speech that you can read of Edward Everett is a very one-sided approach to the Battle of Gettysburg and the Union cause, or the cause for the American Civil War. and you can go out and read it. But he is really, according to many scholars, we all agree that he's probably one of the earliest historians. He's working without the official records. He's working without diaries and different things that we have today as a historian. He comes here to the field, he learns about it, and then he gives in his 2-hour oration, which some people thought was a little long and a little much, a walk through divisional level history of the Battle of Gettysburg. And he does a fairly good job of getting the history correct without, lacking those primary sources. And then there are hymns, dirges, and then Abraham Lincoln will rise to speak for about 3 minutes. And, there's a little bit of question of exactly what was the wording of the Gettysburg Address. The White House has the official Hayes-Nicolay version of it, but it turns out to be about 272 words in 10 sentences. And Lincoln is giving a wartime speech. He's setting wartime policy, but as Chris pointed out, he's also pointing towards the future because this war has to end at some point. So what is the challenge set before them in the present, and what will be the challenges set in the future?
Our good friend Doug Dowds has a wonderful video on the American Battlefield Trust YouTube page. I encourage everyone to go check it out. And he talks about Lincoln's ability to time travel throughout that speech. And he talks about founders founding the new nation. So he goes into the past. He talks about we're gathered here on this battlefield in the present. And he talks about that vision for the future. And he's able to do that, as Doug points out, because he uses that word here. He uses a lot of first-person pronouns, I, we, us. So, we're all in this together. It is our common work together to do. And so it's just a remarkable piece of rhetoric that justifiably stands as one of the great speeches in American history. And so it's neat that everyone gets together here in November to commemorate Lincoln's appearance here, to commemorate those words, to ourselves be rededicated to the great task remaining before us. And so that's, I think, an important component of this. We were talking about sort of the tailgate atmosphere and how festive it is, but there is that very solemn, very important trust that has been passed on to us and the work that we have to carry on before us today. So seeing the lead elements of the parade coming, here's the security detail. We've got National Park Police, we've got City Police, beautiful, beautiful Clydesdales there that are leading the way.
And I want to give a shout out some folks we met earlier today who are out here. Tom, it was nice to meet you as well. John Pinkerton, who's on here, I want to give a big shout out to John Pinkerton. If you were down here for the 30th anniversary of the Gettysburg movie last month, most of that was due to the work of just a few people, and including John Pinkerton. He is an avid collector. He is the Gettysburg fanboy, if you will, for the Gettysburg movie. He has given us unparalleled access to things worn by Martin Sheen, to Stephen Lang, Jeff Daniels, and so many others who are in the movie, and such a favorite for Civil War aficionados around the world. So John, thank you so much, and yet again, another Pittsburgher heard from today.
Since we're talking about unsung heroes, I just want to give a shout out to the folks who are following the horses with the manure rake and trash can, keeping the parade route clean as we get the lead of the actual parade itself coming down the Baltimore street right now. But geez, this is really neat. Folks are very excited about the parade as it's coming. You heard the round of applause a few minutes ago for our law enforcement officials and just the great work that they're doing to keep things safe for us, keep things moving today. We really appreciate the work that they're doing behind the scenes so we can all get together and have a good time today.
And before the head of the parade makes it down here, I just want to say thank you all for watching. Please share this with your friends. Click that subscribe button, that like button, and check out battlefields.org, which is our website for the American Battlefield Trust. And we have a lot of free videos. One that I want to point out that Gary Edelman's put a lot of time into, and it is a 3D step-in video that just released yesterday in partnership with Gettysburg National Military Park and Wide Awake Films. And it is just a fantastic video. You can experience in 3D walking into the Gettysburg Address crowd, and I can't say enough for how much work went into that and how well it turned out. We have others which are called step-in videos there. We have all kinds of videos available at our American Battlefield Trust YouTube channel. Thank you for supporting us, and thank you to all of our historians throughout the year who step up and really give their time to us to bring you top quality content here for free. And as the head of the parade makes its way down here, we have at the front the Sons of Union Veterans, our host of this event, who are marching along. The gentlemen at the front of the parade, in front of the banner, they are our organizers. They're the ones who are going to help to make sure everybody's where they're supposed to be. And there's a lot of work that goes into these parades. You literally have reenactors coming from around the world to be here to take part in this. And the Sons of Union Veterans, they are descendants of soldiers from the U.S. Army who served during the American Civil War.
And boy, you can hear the brass band coming down the street. You can hear the drums going. Just what a remarkable kickoff to this parade as we get going. The color guard just passing by now, so you can see the Sons of Union Veterans flags themselves, along with the national flags. Just a really neat way to get things started. And some great Civil War music here. My toes are tapping.
So you'll see here with the Sons of Union Veterans marching by, they have their colors massed together. That means their flags. That's what they mean by the colors. And those are all put together and marching with the color guard here in behind the band. We won't talk the whole time. Folks in the years past have said, let us hear the band, so we will do that. But as they march past, we'll give you some more commentary here.
And the drum identified them as the 73rd Ohio Volunteer Infantry Regimental Band.
And the 73rd Ohio is made famous after the American Civil War because it has a very famous ancestor of Richard Nixon, a man named George Nixon, who was mortally wounded here at Gettysburg with the 73rd Ohio and is buried in Soldiers National Cemetery.
Here we have President Lincoln riding by in a carriage. Folks giving him an appropriate round of applause.
And Lincoln would have ridden a horse down Baltimore Street as he was heading off towards the place where he gave the Gettysburg Address, and as he does so, some people claim the horse was too small. That's not actually the case. He's just a large man on top of a horse, and we have many accounts throughout the Civil War stating that he looks very ungangly and unwieldy on a horse, so that's not always the case. And we have some ladies here that we'd like to give a special shout out to, the ladies of the Grand Army of the Republic.
So after the Grand Army of the Republic formed in 1866, several ladies organizations began. And once again, here we have the ladies of the Grand Army of the Republic, Inc., who've been serving veterans since 1881. This year, the Ohio group recreated an authentic sanitary fair at their local Civil War ball, and they're donating the $1,400 fundraised to the American Battlefield Trust for Civil War preservation efforts. All members are female blood-kin descendants of Union soldiers or Army nurses who served in the United States Civil War. The mission of the ladies of the Grand Army of the Republic is to teach patriotism and preserve the history of ancestries.
Thank you so much for your donation to the American Battlefield Trust, and they're one of the reasons we're able to bring this to you. The members and the donors of the American Battlefield Trust really support us. Coming down the street now, we have the United States Colored Infantry, the United States Colored Troops. This year, they are marching under one banner together, the 3rd United States Colored Infantry. They were trained at Camp William Penn, which would have been out in Philadelphia area. It was run by a member of the 88th Pennsylvania who had been wounded, and he becomes commandant of the camp at William Penn, which produces many of the United States Colored Troops units. The flag that they're under looks like one that is a recreation of a very famous African-American artist of the time, a man named David Bustier Bowser, who did a lot of the hand-painted flags. And the flags of the Civil War are many times silk, hand-painted. You can get them from places like Tiffany and Company in New York, including, and Tiffany and Company also sold swords, among other things.
A lot of people sometimes confused, geez, why are there United States Colored Troops here? They weren't at the Battle of Gettysburg. But if we think about what Lincoln's Gettysburg Address talked about, and that new birth of freedom certainly really ties directly to the story of the United States Colored Troops. So it's nice to have them represented here as part of the flag. Here we've got the 6th Independent New York Battery and their flag coming by.
6th Independent New York Battery. They're marching here with the red piping on. That's how you would know that they are artillery. The artillery would have red piping. The cavalry would have yellow piping. You had green for the medical. And of course, you would have the infantry with the sky blue. And we have here coming along a gaggle of generals, including U.S. Grant. We have Dan Sickles, who's of course pandering to the crowd in front of us, amongst others.
I see a Phil Sheridan. I've got a George Armstrong Custer out there.
That might be a Beauregard. I can't tell, but he looks pretty jaunty. So that has to be a Beauregard. Coming in behind here, we have
Thaddeus Stevens Society.
Yes. Thaddeus Stevens has a new monument out in front of the Adams County Courthouse.
I think that was actually some pretty admirable Thaddeus Stevens hair on the fellow who was walking by. That was great.
Fife and Drum Corps of Berlin, Pennsylvania.
Beautiful team of horses. Seeing a lot of beautiful horses today.
Approaching now is one of the Pennsylvania units. They're representing part of Alexander Webb's brigade here at Gettysburg, the 69th Pennsylvania. They were made famous by helping to repulse Pickett's charge on July 3rd, 1863. They would have been one of the units down there at the Federal Center, part of what's known as the Philadelphia Brigade, who served in the Federal Center, commanded by Medal of Honor recipient Alexander Webb.
Of course, by this point in the war, the Irish Brigade has been chewed up pretty significantly. They, of course, have their famous actions at Antietam and at Fredericksburg. By the time they get here to Gettysburg, their numbers are significantly diminished.
And as we come down here, we have another band. We'll give you a little musical break before we start talking about the group following behind, which I believe is the Mifflin Guard, which is formed out of the Philadelphia and New Jersey area. So in the foreground, you would have seen the company marching along here. They're doing a right shoulder shift. If your officers, like the men who are there serving with, they are going to make you change your arms constantly on a march. And your arms are your weapons. As you're marching along, you'll be at the shoulder, but after a while, your arm's going to start to hurt. So they go to the right shoulder shift, which will take it up and give it a little bit more weight of that gun on your shoulder rather than your elbow when you're at shoulder arms, which is kind of ironic. Then you can go to support arms, which would have the men almost look like they're putting Napoleon's hand in the chest. They'll hold their gun up with their left arm going across, supporting the hammer and stock area. And then coming in here behind right shoulder shift in the green will be the Berdan sharpshooters. Chris, earlier today we passed some and you're like, man, those are snazzy uniforms.
They are. Those are sharp uniforms. Of course,
for sharpshooters,
sharpshooters, and of course designed so that they can blend in. It's an early form of camouflage. Also just helps reinforce the elan of them as a special group, really help establish their identities. Chris, I think that ties into something else. I don't know if folks can see very well on the camera, but we're seeing a lot of corps badges on hats as soldiers march by. Here we've got another distinctive set of hats. We've got the Pennsylvania Bucktails coming. In order to prove your medal, as the story went, you were supposed to go out and shoot a deer to show that you had the marksmanship skills, and then you would put the tail of that deer on your hat to show that you were part of the group. And that, again, that spirit, that elan to show that you belong to an elite group was really important. So, Chris, I started to mention the corps badges, something that really speaks to the identity of these groups. Why was that such an important innovation to be able to tell groups apart?
So this is Mr. F.J. Hooker, as Robert E. liked to call him, Mr. Fighting Joe Hooker. He installs these corps badges. We have a group of the Zouaves, looks like the 84th New York, the 14th Brooklyn marching by. They served on the first day's field, the second day field at Culp's Hill. And what he wants to do is identify these folks who are largely dressed in blue, so to make it easier. So he gives them identifications of a disc for the first corps, a trefoil for the second, a diamond for the third, and then he colorizes them with red, white, blue, and green for the first, second, third, and fourth divisions. So this is an easier way to identify the units. Men will start to get some esprit de corps around them. What they're going to do is really, for the rest of their lives, identify with these corps badges. If you go up to Joshua Lawrence Chamberlain's home in Maine, you'll see that. The Fifth Corps Maltese Cross everywhere. So it's a really interesting use of the Corps badge today. They are our modern divisional patches. The 82nd Airborne, the Big Red 1, the 101st Airborne Division, all of their patches come back to the American Civil War. Marching along here, you'll see with turbans on, puffy pants like MC Hammer, short coats, those are our Zouaves. They were come out of the French Algerian style, and Zouaves are used by the American Army, thought to be elite. They don't really have any different training, but they wear different uniforms. But Zouave units will exist all the way through the First World War. In fact, the French Army will wear many of the similar uniforms that Union and Confederate soldiers would wear off to the battlefields of Europe in 1914, including Zouave outfits, which were influenced by the French here over in America.
We're seeing some units walk by with the sprigs of boxwood in their hats. That was also used to kind of identify folks on the battlefield. Sometimes they would put it in as a rallying cry. It was common for the Irishmen at the Battle of Fredericksburg, for instance, to put sprigs of boxwood in their hats to help show who they were as they were on the battlefield together. But it's also, some units used it just to kind of identify where they were from, to identify that connection to nature in some instances, and just, again, a form of being distinctive and having that esprit de corps. See lots of really fascinating uniforms, officer uniforms specifically, lots of really distinctive sashes. Chris, is there a difference between the red and the maroon that we're looking at here?
So when you see up front, that's a good question, Chris. First off, the guy on the left, who has the red sash, he's a non-commissioned officer. He's a sergeant major. He's a guy who works for a living. The guy next to him is the colonel, who, as we joke in the reenacting world, doesn't have to work for a living. His darker maroon shows that he is an officer grade, where he has shoulder bars or shoulder boards, wearing those along. They also serve a purpose, not only to show that you are a non-commissioned officer versus a commissioned officer. They also help to save your buttons, because as you wrap that around, those sword belts can be very heavy at times, especially when you put a pistol or a revolver on there, and they could break your buttons. So they actually do have somewhat of a purpose to kind of make sure that your buttons stay in place. But as you see here, everyone's dressing up. Not all the time during the Civil War, especially later in the war, would soldiers have spit and polish parades. They always want to be spit and polished here, marching in perfect step as much as they can.
It isn't interesting that even here among the Union Army, the uniforms aren't quite so uniform. There's lots of little touches of distinctiveness and individuality. Certainly as these soldiers kind of had to live in these uniforms for as long as they did, they're going to take on personalities of their own. Later on in the war, when you have more fresh units coming in thanks to the draft and conscription, again, you're going to see things get a lot more spit and polished once more as these guys are thrown into battle. Chris, I noticed that we talked about the maroon and the red sashes. I saw some green ones a moment ago.
So green are very important. Those are for your medical staff. The medical has green on them, and that was the medical staff coming up behind. And for those of you just joining us here at the American Battlefield Trust, we are at the Farnsworth House here in Gettysburg covering the Remembrance Day Parade. This is the annual 67th annual parade that is here to honor not only the veterans of the battle, the fallen of the battle, but also the fact that the Gettysburg Address took place 160 years ago tomorrow, one of the most important addresses in American history. I put it up there as in the top 3.
For sure.
And you know, so it's interesting to see everybody come out, pay homage to American history, sometimes their ancestors. As I mentioned earlier, folks do this for a variety of different reasons. And here coming in, I think these are more Brooklyners. This is definitely the 14th Brooklyn here, who are dressed up in that Zouave style uniform.
Chris, a few moments ago we had members of the U.S. Sanitary Commission come by, instrumental in providing lots of logistical assistance behind the scenes to the medical staff, everything from stationery to medical supplies. They would write letters home for wounded soldiers, really did a lot to support the troops behind the scenes, serving as a real important conduit from private donations to help support these soldiers, particularly in hospitals. Colonel Louis Francine Post from New Jersey.
Yeah, back to Chris's point about the Sanitary Commission, the American Red Cross really isn't a thing during the Civil War. It's in its infancy, as is the International Red Cross. That's something that starts to come out of the wars in Europe, and eventually it will really take hold in the 1870s and 80s. But we need do-gooders to help, and North and South, there'll be commissions who are going to help to send aid to the front. The Sanitary Commission and the U.S. Christian Commission come in here in the days after Gettysburg, utilizing donations to help deal with wounded soldiers, to help feed the soldiers, clothe them, house them. There will be, in Alabama, they will send early in the war aid up to Central Virginia whenever there's battles up in that area for the Confederacy. After the Battle of Fredericksburg, there's a great giving north and south to try to aid the civilians of Fredericksburg. There's a very philanthropic air about these folks, and just because you weren't on the front lines doesn't mean that you didn't have a hand in the war. And it's important to remember that this war touches just about every home in America in some way, economically, politically, socially. My family lost a family member during this war. My wife's family lost, actually didn't lose any family members, but had a few wounded. They actually survived. One, ironically, who was with the 8th North Carolina, who did not fight here at Gettysburg, claims to his dying day that he was wounded here and milks that for all he is worth with the Confederate Veteran Association that he's part of. It's actually kind of funny to hear or to read his experience. Where was he? He was actually fighting on Morris Island. Shortly hereafter, he was one of the Confederate defenders of Battery Wagner. So if you ever saw the movie Glory, he was on the other side. He wasn't. He was with the Confederate Army and not with the Union Army who fought there. So it's interesting to see how it all plays out with the veterans remembering what they were up to or not remembering or what they were up to.
Remembering what they wanted to
Yeah.
remember. So we had a group of Gettysburg civilians come through just a moment ago, and we've seen lots of different civilians. Chris, I'm seeing people on horseback, I'm seeing people on foot, I'm seeing what appears to be like different classes, socioeconomic classes of people. What was Gettysburg like as a community as far as just the folks who lived here?
Well, to be quite honest with you, you are in the smelly part of Gettysburg right now, if you were here in 1863, because there are 2 tanneries here. And when the tanneries would go, the smell down here would have been awful. But you're actually in an area that's pretty, what we would consider today middle class or even upper middle class. The home across the street from us, which I'll pan to, which is Mr. G's, that was here. That was the home of John Weinbrenner. There were 4 houses very similar to this, owned by John Rupp and Solomon Welty, who had been right up and along these lines. So you have these brick homes that witnessed the battle, and civilians were oftentimes inside of the cellars there, and there's some stories that go along with these places. Harvey Sweeney, his home here, which is today the Farnsworth House, that would have been occupied by civilians down the street. The Rupp House would have had civilians there. So this area would have been, the business class of Gettysburg. You would have tanners, you would have down here carriage makers close by, and it's a town on the rise. It has gaslit streets, it has the railroad, telegraphs coming through here, 2,400 people, 2 institutes of higher education that they still have today, the Lutheran Theological Seminary, the first in the United States, and at the time Pennsylvania College today, which is Gettysburg College. So it's a town on the rise. The railroad just came through here, and of course that's what brings Abraham Lincoln here on November 18, 1863 for the 25 hours he spends here in Gettysburg. Here comes the Grand Army of the Republic. These are descendants of the soldiers. These are what you would think of when you watch in the 1913 films and reels we have, or the 1938 reels. The older gentlemen, this is what they would look like whenever they had aged. These are aging reenactors who are now portraying what an aging Civil War veteran would look like.
GAR banner that they had coming with them, and now they're going to be followed up by the Sons of Confederate Veterans, a veterans organization for descendants of folks who came from men who served in the Confederate armies.
That's the John Wesley Culp camp here in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. John Wesley Culp, famously of the Culp family, was killed somewhere on the Gettysburg battlefield. There's controversy of where he may have been. Where he may have fought, may not have fought, or may have died or may not have died. But that is John Wesley Culp's Hill fame. That is going to see a lot of action there. So the Sons of Confederate Veterans are exactly what you think of. They're an organization that are based on the ancestors who fought for the Confederate Army, much like the Grand Army of the Republic or the Sons of Union Veterans. Coming along here, it looks like we have a hodgepodge of Confederates, and that's probably the best way you can put it sometimes with the Confederate Army. The Confederates sometimes were so well clad and outfitted, and other times it's going to be very homespun. It's interesting to read the accounts as the Confederates go off to war and as the war wears on, how they obtain uniforms. Some of these guys you'll see have blue pants on or blue coats. Those may have been, if they were in the war, captured by Confederates at places like Harper's Ferry, or taken off the battlefield at places like Second Manassas. Here goes the 5th Texas beside us, made famous here with their assault on Devil's Den and Little Round Top, the famed Texas Brigade under Polly Robertson here at Gettysburg. You can see here as they come down here, marching at support arms. We have the Confederates doing their arms changes, and coming up behind, just like some of the Union veterans or Union reenactors did, they'll have massing of their colors.
Chris, we see some of these units are marching with bayonets on, some with bayonets off. As a reenactor, what are the concerns if you've got a bayonet or not?
Yeah, bayonets look cool. They really do. The problem that you have with the bayonet, though, is in reenacting, if you're loading your gun, you can actually stab yourself in the hand. Union Confederate soldiers would do the same thing on the battlefield. You have problems whenever you put them into your scabbard with the bayonets. You have to be careful if there's not a tip on the end of your scabbard and it's open. That means you can actually turn and stab someone. The scabbard's what holds your bayonets on your belt. But the bayonets also, they're called socket bayonets. They just kind of go over top the end of the barrel of the gun, and they will throw the weight of that gun off. So if you ever watch Band of Brothers, I think it's episode 3, maybe 4, whenever they participate in Operation Market Garden, they say that one of the guys puts his bayonet on, and up comes Bull, and he says, "That ain't going to shoot us straight." And that's the truth. Yeah. It's going to throw off your aim.
Quite a display of different sorts of Confederate flags here from the Maryland Sons of Confederate Veterans. Who are we? Maryland, they're chanting.
And now coming up here, we have more Sons of Confederate Veterans from Sussex County and the Delaware Grays. Behind is more coming up here. And then we'll have the massing of their colors for all the Sons of Confederate Veterans. And then following them is the United Daughters of the Confederacy, the UDC, which was founded in the mid-1890s and a very influential organization in many, many ways.
The Daughters did a lot to influence textbook content, battlefield interpretation, using their social influence to influence the men in political power, but also, and I think even more importantly, using their economic influence to exert pressure on how things were interpreted. So they had a significant role in really determining how the story of the war was told and passed on. Chris, I'm seeing an Irish Brigade flag among the Confederates.
Well, there are Irish Confederates. There's not a Confederate Irish Brigade, which was made famous by the movies Gods and Generals. But there are Irish units within the Confederacy. I think that's the best way I can put it. It wasn't Irish versus Irish in the sunken road at Fredericksburg, which is...
a long-going myth that continues to get traction.
And is abandoned existence of one of our friends who was just saying some of that the other night. But yeah, you would have different flags. The Union Army normally carried two flags. One would be your national colors, the United States colors. The other would normally be your state color, your state flag. Sometimes there would be three flags, like the 39th New York, the Garibaldi Guard were able to carry three flags. Confederates a lot of times would carry one flag. That could be the Bonnie Blue flag. That could be the Confederate flag here that we see in front of us. Sometimes they would have the stainless banner coming along. With the Confederates, it was more of a variation, and it's really the Union and Confederate flags are in many ways, whenever you look at them, made by artists. They're hand painted, they're put on silk, and if you see them today, they were made with care. If you look very closely, a lot of times you have to be careful because after 160 years, the paint is coming off the silk, but it's a really interesting thing to see. And you can check out some of our videos about Union and Confederate flags that we've shot over the years on our YouTube channel. Chris and I were just in the Mississippi State Archives taking some time learning more about flags there with my friend Shane Kyle. Marching along here, we have some Confederate artillerists with their sponge rammers. They would rather bring their sponges along rather than the artillery pieces, which are much, much heavier to roll down the road. So I don't blame them for carrying the sponges, and that is representing what looks like Maryland, and it looks like they're representing the artillery.
Well, since we're down here in the Valley of Weinbrenner Run, too, I imagine trying to navigate one of those artillery pieces down the hill to our north, probably a logistics challenge these guys don't want to have to deal with on a day like today. Now we're seeing some Confederate officers coming up. We've got another Robert E. Lee walking through. It looks like some guys coming up here on horses.
Yeah, the plumage is amazing, so it must be Jeb Stuart. Probably potentially Heroes von Bork that's here behind as well, who is a staff officer for Jeb Stuart. You might see the Prussian symbol there on his saddle blanket. Coming down here is the Maryland Sutler. The Maryland Sutler has a sutlery up here on Baltimore Street. A sutler is somebody who sells things to soldiers, and sutlers are places where shops where reenactors can purchase goods like their weaponry that they have out here, shoes, blankets, anything else you can think of. And the Maryland Sutler has a really cool wagon. They've been riding up and down the sidewalks and streets here all morning.
And I think the Robert E. Lee we just saw walking by, Thomas Jesse, a friend of ours, does Lee all around the world, and was the Lee at the 150th Appomattox anniversary. And again, another fine fellow with a wheelbarrow and a pitchfork, bringing up the rear end of the column here. So Chris, lots to see here, a mishmash of Civil War stuff. I saw Ulysses S. Grant, for instance. There's not a Grant at Gettysburg during the time of the battle, but we're seeing such a collection of Civil War memory here that it seems appropriate to see things like that in an event like this.
Yeah, and for the average viewer who's never been here to Gettysburg, to Remembrance Day, you're going to see George Armstrong Custer dressed up a little bit more flamboyantly than he probably would have been at the time of the battle. It's probably a later war Custer. Grant, of course, is out west. I think it's important to remember what's happening here in Gettysburg in November of 1863 isn't happening in a vacuum. At the same time that this is happening down in Virginia, George Gordon Meade is preparing his next offensive known as the Mine Run Campaign. That'll take place about a week later. Out west, Ulysses S. Grant is preparing to take Lookout Mountain and Missionary Ridge to break the siege of Chattanooga. And then in the Confederacy, Jefferson Davis is coming to the front, meeting with Robert E. Lee at a place called Orange Courthouse. And in fact, 6 days after the Gettysburg Address, one of my favorite accounts of what Robert E. Lee and Jefferson Davis looks like was penned by a soldier sitting a few rows behind the two of them. He said that Jefferson Davis looked exactly like he did on a postage stamp, and he called Robert E. Lee, I didn't call him this, he called Robert E. Lee beefy, and even said that he had hair growing out of his ears. But it was amazing the description that he had of him. And the Confederates are getting ready to meet those two Union offensives that will close out the year 1863. And Abraham Lincoln, while he's here delivering the Gettysburg Address, he is delivering a war speech or a war address, saying that we are going to keep going to see this through to the end. And I think this is a slight continuation of the Emancipation Proclamation, which is an executive order. I don't think you can tie them too closely together, but I think this says a little bit more eloquently some things he probably wanted to say in January of 1863. Now he has this opportunity, and we know he's been working on a version of the speech for months, and this will be his opportunity. And of course, the main reason he is here and everyone else is here is for the dedication of the 3,512 the soldiers who are buried here in Soldiers National Cemetery, establishing that Gettysburg National Cemetery.
And it's so easy to skip over the cemetery when you come to Gettysburg because there are so many things to do and see, and people love to get back out onto those landscapes that they fell in love with as kids and explore Devil's Den and go out through the wheat field. But I think it's really important to stop at the cemetery and walk among the graves and reflect about the meaning of what this war was. It's easy to get lost in the atmosphere of Gettysburg or the commercialism or the ghost stories. And I'm not disparaging any of that because it's a wonderful place to come. But walking through that cemetery creates a whole different kind of meaning for this town, for this battle, for this experience as Civil War scholars and buffs. It's really important not to overlook what that can bring to us.
And I want to wrap up our coverage here at Gettysburg. I want to thank you for watching here from the Farnsworth House. I want to thank the Farnsworth House for the 7th year in a row for hosting us. You can go back, watch these on Facebook and YouTube from years past. Check out everything we have over at battlefields.org. I want to thank Mike and his gaggle of friends that we had up here on the porch with us. And I want to thank all the reenactors for being here today, as well as the town of Gettysburg and the borough of Gettysburg and Gettysburg National Military Park for helping to put on these different memorial ceremonies. And of course, head over to battlefields.org and learn more about what we do, how you can help support battlefield preservation and education. And I can't thank enough my Al Roker, Chris Mikowski, for being here today as we brought you the 67th Annual Remembrance Day Parade. Chris, any closing thoughts?
It's a privilege to be here. Chris, thanks for having me. Thank you, everyone, for all you're doing. I saw the trust well represented on hats and swags and stuff throughout the crowd today. It's just a great reminder that we've got this battlefield because of the dedication of so many of our supporters, just like you. So thanks for being with us.